Solve it here, waitress. 10 minutes. Fail, and you apologize to everyone in this room. The sentence cracked across the dining room like a gavel, cutting through the hush of silver and stemware, through the last ribbon of jazz that drifted from the corner speaker. Hartwell stood with one hand in his pocket as if the verdict were already written, his other hand releasing a linen napkin scrawled with inked symbols that slid across the white tablecloth toward Kesha's wrist. Crystal lights threw a faint theater blue across the salmon-pink banquets and the framed black and white photograph of New York fishermen on the far wall. It was 9:30, and the room was in its soft afterglow, a stretch of service when the clink of dessert spoons replaces the metallic tempo of entrees. At his table center of the room, a stage disguised as a reservation, finance men and their guests held phones face down beside empty martini glasses, alert as chess players who had stopped pretending not to watch. Kesha Williams, damp from the weight of the water carafe, set it down on the tray with a careful click and felt every eye land on her like grit in a new pair of shoes. She had not meant to say anything. It had slipped out the way breath escapes in winter. A thought voice she would have swallowed if she could have felt it coming. Your iteration flips sign at step 7. The symbols had called to her without permission, scribbled in Hartwell's slanted, impatient pen on a napkin positioned beside his spoon. Thick loops of summations and a neat little arrow that pretended it had nowhere else to go. She had only paused long enough to glance once, the way a nurse glances at a monitor and knows the green line is lying. Then the room tilted. He had caught her looking. Now the napkin lay before her elbow like a dare. Damp at the corner where a drop of Cabernet had bled into the margin. The ink bruised purple where the wine met the math. Sir, she said, measured. The word balanced on the tongue the way she balanced hot plates across a crowded floor. I'm working. You're performing, Hartwell replied, smiling without his eyes. Aren't we all? He gestured, and a waiter rolled a small whiteboard from the private dining room one used for staff briefings about specials, parking it at his side with the squeak of a stubborn wheel. 10 minutes. 3 lines. Show us what I missed. At the far banquet, a silver-haired couple fell suddenly still, his hand covering hers as if stopping a radio dial. At table 6 a woman in a black sheath dress mouthed wow to no one. The manager, Jeppy, surfaced from the kitchen pass like a submarine captain. Jaw tight. The tone he used when a glass shattered or a VIP asked for a different seat. Miss Williams, he murmured, just for her. A calm that arrived too late to be useful. Refill table 3. Then step back. She heard the order and the old muscle memory of saying yes trembled in her throat. The part of the job that made you smaller so you could be everywhere at once. But another current moved below it, steady as a subway crossing the East River at night. I did not ask for this, she thought, and felt the quiet of that truth stiffen her spine. Maybe math never left me. Maybe I just left it waiting in the dish pit. She picked up the napkin. The paper was cool and slightly rough. The way linen holds room temperature. The ring that had bound it earlier gleamed like a coin under a street lamp. A small circle of stainless that somehow looked like judgment. She lifted her gaze and found Hartwell's eyes. They were the color of polished nickel, pointless to describe as blue when what they did was reflect. Mathematics doesn't care about my uniform, she said evenly. Only my accuracy. The room registered the sentence with a ripple that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't approval either. That third thing New Yorkers do when they're trying to decide what to be. We'll see, Hartwell said, and moved aside with courtly malice, granting her the width of the whiteboard as if handing down a privilege he meant to take back. She stepped toward the board and felt the floor give slightly under the carpet, a thin mercy under expensive heels. The dry erase marker was still warm from a busser's hand. She uncapped it and the familiar, solvent sweet scent rose up, small as a secret. She didn't look at the crowd again. She looked at the napkin. Symbols are a kind of music when you remember the tune, even a single bar can return the melody whole. There it was. An index that pretended to run forward while the bound drifted another way, the direction hidden beneath notational politeness. Positive to negative without penance. She began with a line no longer than a breath. A s curled on the board and took its place. Voices behind her subsided the way they do in churches and on court steps. The jazz from the speaker had limped into silence when the host, nervous, turned the volume wheel too far. The A divided by C murmured. Somewhere in the back a pastry torch hissed over a sugar crust. She wrote 3 symbols in a row that made a shape she recognized. Then paused and looked sideways at the napkin again. Not to check she already knew the error but to gather the room into the work. If she walked too fast, they would stay back. Bring them forward. She drew the second line, slower, laying the pathway with the patience of someone who had shown strangers where the restroom was 3,000 times and never once sighed. This is theater, one of the investors whispered, trying to enjoy himself. It's dinner, his guest answered, unable to decide if fear or fascination tasted better. Kesha heard the whisper and let it be a metronome. In her periphery, a woman near the window set down her glass and angled in her seat, watchful in a way that wasn't hungry, not the way the others were. 60-ish, tidy gray bob, a face that measured before it concluded. Kesha would learn her name later. For now, she took a breath. She hoped no one could see and wrote the third line, the corrective tilt, the sign that refused to play along. She stopped. The board looked clean, almost spare. She could have flooded it with derivations and algebraic stitching, but restraint is a kind of hospitality. The arithmetic here was a ladder missing a rung, and people don't need a new ladder to understand a missing rung. At step 7, she said, keeping her voice even so it would carry without scolding. The iteration flips. You're treating the tail as if it were still wagging the same direction. But you never reset the boundary. So the behavior you predict never arrives. It can't. The path is pointing the other way. Hartwell lifted the napkin as if maybe the paper had betrayed him. He didn't look at her. He looked at the board the way a litigant looks at a clerk who misread a statute. He smiled. Small and sharp. Cute, he said. Anyone can circle a typo. Phones tilted up. Hunting for the next line. Kesha could feel the room slide toward him again, the strange gravity of a man who had learned early that confidence is a microphone even when you're nowhere near a stage. It isn't a typo, she said, quiet as water poured into a glass. It's a convention and a choice. The choice is wrong. He shrugged. Show me. She almost laughed. It would have been the wrong sound for this room, for these people. For herself, but inside there was a brief, warm spark. The private joy of being asked to make the invisible visible. She wrote a small curve beside the S, a child's drawing of a hill. You assumed it kept going this way, she said, tracing the slope with the marker's felt tip. Then she slanted the line the other way. But after the switch, it walks here. You're calling the second path by the first path's name. She stepped back, outlined both with a simple bracket, and set the marker on the tray. It clicked, a little sound that found the server in her. The way clicks meant plates were down and a guest could exhale. She waited. A few chuckles rose and died. A fork toppled gently on porcelain. Somewhere near the host stand a delivery app buzzed and was stilled with an embarrassed palm. The woman with the gray bob leaned slightly nearer, as if checking a recipe. Then she nodded small, to herself and lifted her gaze to Hartwell's face, with a calm that cooled the air by a degree. Jeppy took a half step forward and stopped, as if the carpet had become procedural. He looked at Kesha's back the way a supervisor looks at a cliff edge and an employee's feet. The silver-haired couple breathed out together, soundless as a shared prayer. And Kesha, hands now free of the napkin and the marker and the fact of being watched, stood at the seam where the service world and the show world meet and do not greet. She thought, not in words but in the slow light way thoughts arrive when they've traveled years to find you. I know this. I know this because I was not paid to ignore it. Hartwell touched the napkin ring with a thumb, set it spinning on the linen, a small orbit on a white sky. He glanced at the board again, then at the little crowd his performance had made. Something in his jaw flickered doubt, or annoyance that doubt could still exist in a man who had taught it to sleep. He took one step toward the whiteboard, then another, but did not speak. The room seemed to lean with him, every table a sail. Kesha didn't move. The board did not move. The napkin stopped spinning. The dining room, a courtroom, a quiet chapel, waited for the simplest verdict New York ever asks of anyone who claims to know better. Do you see it or don't you? And for a heartbeat long enough to count. The only sound in Le Bernardin was the breath of people who have suddenly remembered almost against their will that truth does not wear a tuxedo to be let in. The applause never came, not yet. It was a silence that didn't know which way to turn, a fragile pause balanced between humiliation and revelation. Kesha could feel it, the indecision of the crowd breathing down her neck like a draft from an old window. Hartwell's fingers flexed against the napkin ring, metal clicking softly. And in that sound, she felt the weight of years pressing behind this moment. He wasn't just a man offended. He was a man whose authority was the architecture of the room itself. She didn't blink. Behind the counter, Jeppy cleared his throat, the coded signal of a manager begging for normalcy. "Coffee refills?" he said too brightly, his voice cracking like thin glass. No one answered. The woman with the gray bob, still seated near the window, broke the tension first. "She's right," she murmured. Almost to herself but just loud enough to be caught by a nearby microphone that someone's phone had left open. It wasn't defiance, just quiet certainty, but it shifted the balance. Hartwell's smile went rigid. "And you are?" "Sarah Carter," she said. Standing now. The name hit him with a jolt. Doctor Sarah Carter, the retired Fields medalist, who had once called his early work brilliant but brittle. He had never forgiven the phrasing. The guests murmured, recognizing her face from an old PBS documentary, the one about mathematics and morality. Carter turned to Kesha. "Show me the step again." Slowly. Kesha hesitated, then picked up the marker and drew the curve, this time pacing it like a heartbeat. The rhythm calmed her. As she moved, something loosened inside, a door that had been locked since Cambridge. The smell of ethanol cleaner and truffle butter dissolved, replaced by the sterile hum of MIT's math lab 5 years ago. She saw herself sitting alone at a terminal at 2 in the morning, winter light filtering through frosted glass, fingers tracing invisible proofs in the air while her mother's voice echoed through the phone. "Baby, they said the insurance doesn't cover it this time." The words had been so gentle, so tired. That night, she opened the email that told her the scholarship committee couldn't extend another semester. She had read it 3 times before closing the laptop and walking home through snow that swallowed her shoes. In that memory, she hadn't cried. She had simply stopped solving. The equations felt like broken promises. The flashback faded as Carter's voice drew her back to the present. "Beautiful," the older woman whispered. "That's not algebra, that's perception." Kesha let out a small, disbelieving laugh, the kind that starts in the chest and dies on the lips. "I used to think perception wasn't allowed in math," she said quietly. "You've just proved otherwise." Carter turned to Hartwell. "Her correction holds. Your assumption collapses under polarity inversion." It was polite phrasing, academic. But it landed like a stone dropped in water. Ripples of conversation spread around the tables. Hartwell's jaw tightened, his public smile reassembled itself like armor. "Perhaps," he said smoothly, "but we're not at a symposium. We're in a restaurant. She's not a peer, she's staff." The investors chuckled uneasily, laughter shaped like retreat. Carter's eyes hardened. Truth doesn't care where it's served. Kesha's heart hammered. She wanted to leave. To vanish through the kitchen door and pretend this never happened, but a strange steadiness anchored her feet. Her voice, when it came, was softer than she expected. "You said 10 minutes. There's still 2 left." Hartwell's brow rose. He leaned back, regarding her as one might a stubborn child. "You want the rest of your performance? Fine, prove something bigger. Something that isn't written on a napkin." His tone turned mocking again. But his gaze flickered toward Carter, measuring the damage. "You want to test me?" Kesha asked. "No," he said. "I want to remind everyone why some people build empires and others serve wine." She heard a soft gasp from one of the hostesses. The line was cruel even by Manhattan standards. Kesha stepped closer to the board, heart pounding. "Then ask your empire a question," she said. "And I'll answer it." He smiled thinly. "Very well. Suppose infinity could fold back on itself. Would the sum of all positives still be positive?" The question wasn't new. It was an intellectual trap. A paradox designed to tangle intuition. She had seen versions of it as a student, had once fallen into its symmetry, and loved the fall. "Only if you think infinity obeys you," she replied, before she realized she'd spoken aloud. A faint stir of laughter moved through the room, not mocking, but startled. Carter's eyes gleamed. "Keep going." Kesha reached for the marker again. Her fingers didn't shake this time. "Infinity isn't a number," she said slowly. It's a direction. If you fold it, you change the direction. You create something finite, pretending to be endless. She drew two spirals on the board, one chasing the other. This is the illusion your system runs on, she said, her voice steadier now. You built an algorithm that assumes perfection from repetition. People do the same thing with power. You repeat yourself enough, and you start calling it truth. The room exhaled as one. Hartwell's lips parted, but no words followed. For the first time he looked not angry but lost. Carter gave a small nod. A teacher acknowledging the inevitable. That, she said softly, is an answer. Jeppy finally stepped forward, breaking the spell. Mr. Hartwell, he said in his careful hospitality voice. Perhaps we should allow Miss Williams to return to her duties. It was meant as an exit ramp, a polite end. But Hartwell wasn't finished. Let her finish her duties, he said, bitterness curling the words. I'm sure she'll need another job after this. Then he tossed 3 crisp $100 bills onto the table. Payment, dismissal, insult. The notes fanned out like feathers, their edges damp from condensation. The gesture drew a murmur of disapproval this time. One of the older investors muttered, "Bit much, Richard." Carter's expression didn't change, but she picked up one of the bills and folded it neatly, sliding it back toward him. "You've overpaid," she said. The lesson was free. He froze. For the first time that evening, he seemed smaller. Kesha looked at the money, at the board, at the crowd whose faces were a collage of shock and fascination. She said nothing. She simply took the napkin, the original one, the birth certificate of the argument, and folded it with the precision of someone setting a table for a last meal. She slipped it into her apron pocket and turned toward the kitchen. The first step felt heavy, the second lighter, the third almost soundless. Behind her, Carter spoke softly to Hartwell, words Kesha couldn't hear. Somewhere a phone chimed with a message. Breaking news. A whisper of viral curiosity already leaving the room before she did. In the corridor by the prep station, the smells rushed back: garlic, butter, the hum of dishwashers. She pressed her palms to the cool metal of the counter, breathing in the world that still existed when the noise was gone. From the dining room came the muffled pulse of voices rising again, the night resuming its polite disguise. She looked down at her reflection in the steel. Sweat along her hairline, eyes bright with something that wasn't fear anymore. She reached into her pocket and touched the napkin. The ink had smeared slightly, but the math was still visible. Outside, a horn honked on 51st Street. A taxi braking hard. She imagined the city carrying this night forward, fragment by fragment, someone posting a photo, someone retelling it wrong, someone remembering only the arrogance, not the equation. But it didn't matter. The truth was out there now, breathing on its own. She turned back toward the dining room, where the night waited to decide what kind of story it would become. Carter caught her eye through the glass, gave a small nod that said, "It isn't over." And Kesha, feeling for the first time in years that she had stepped back into her own life, nodded in return. By morning, the story had already left the restaurant. It slid through phone screens and subway cars, whispered between coffee shop lines, captured in shaky footage that caught only fragments: the whiteboard, the napkin, a waitress with a steady voice saying something about infinity not obeying anyone. By the time Kesha walked into work the next afternoon, Le Bernardin was half a newsroom. Photographers waited on the opposite curb. A radio host from NPR called it, "The equation heard around the world." She could feel the eyes follow her as she tied her apron. Jeppy, pale and sleepless, cornered her near the espresso machine. "Do you have any idea what's happening?" he whispered. "Hartwell's office called. Legal team. They said you stole proprietary data." She blinked. From a napkin? From his brain, apparently. His hands shook as he wiped a spotless counter. "He's threatening to sue for defamation if you speak publicly." Kesha felt the familiar chill that comes when power starts rewriting reality. "I didn't speak publicly," she said. "I just answered a question." Jep lowered his voice further. "You might want to disappear for a few days." But before she could respond, the door opened and Dr. Sarah Carter entered, trench coat damp from the rain. The room seemed to fold itself around her calm. "I'll take care of this," she said. "Miss Williams, come with me." Kesha untied her apron, ignoring Jeppy's anxious look. Outside, traffic hissed over wet asphalt. The city smelled of rain and roasted nuts from a nearby cart. "You've gone viral," Carter said as they walked toward the corner. "Congratulations and condolences." "He's coming after me," Kesha said quietly. "He's embarrassed." Men like Hartwell mistake embarrassment for injustice. Carter hailed a cab, slid inside, and gestured for her to follow. "We're going uptown." "Where?" "Columbia. They're hosting a symposium on algorithmic ethics. You've just become the perfect case study." The cab threaded through midtown traffic. Kesha watched the gray slush smear against the window. "I'm not a scientist anymore." "You're a truth teller," Carter said. "That's rarer." At the university, cameras lined the steps. Inside, the lecture hall buzzed with the soft chaos of academics adjusting microphones. Carter moved with the confidence of someone who had built rooms like this. "We'll speak together," she said. "I'll frame it as a debate on intellectual ownership." "He'll be there?" "He never turns down a stage." She was right. 10 minutes later, Hartwell arrived with a small entourage and the polished glare of someone rehearsed for battle. His tailored coat barely moved when he walked. "Dr. Carter," he said, nodding with the courtesy of a man greeting an equal he despised. "I see you've brought your protégé." "She's not mine," Carter said. "She belongs to the truth." Hartwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Truth needs better lawyers." The moderator, a young professor nervous about his luck, called the session to order. Cameras clicked. The question projected on the screen read, "Who owns an idea?" Hartwell spoke first. His voice was smooth, his rhythm almost soothing. "A corporate sermon. We celebrate innovation," he said. "But innovation without structure is chaos. What happened last night was chaos, an unsanctioned performance that distorted intellectual property." Kesha sat beside Carter, hands folded, every word pressing like a weight on her shoulders. "He's rewriting it already," she whispered. "Then you rewrite it back," Carter murmured. When her turn came, Kesha rose. The microphone caught the tremor in her breath. "I didn't steal anything," she began. "He made an assumption. I corrected it." "You can't own correction." Murmurs rippled through the hall. She felt stronger as she spoke. "Mathematics doesn't belong to whoever has the most patents. It belongs to whoever can see what's true." Hartwell leaned back, amused. "How noble," he said. "But the world doesn't pay for nobility. It pays for results. And you built your results on a mistake," she said before she could stop herself. The room stilled. The moderator tried to interject, but Carter gestured for silence. "Show him," she whispered. Kesha reached for a marker and approached the whiteboard set up at the front. Her reflection glimmered faintly in its surface. She drew the same spiral she had drawn in the restaurant, the one that had haunted her sleep. "You assume infinite growth," she said, "but you ignore the moment it folds when systems reach awareness. That's where bias hides. Your AI doesn't just miscalculate, it mirrors the arrogance of its maker." A soft gasp moved through the crowd. Hartwell's composure cracked for the briefest second. "Are you accusing me of bias?" "I'm saying your algorithm learned it from you." Carter smiled faintly, almost proud. "She's right again, Richard." The moderator cleared his throat, sensing history happening under the fluorescent lights. "Let's take a brief recess," he said, but no one moved. Then the first phone alert pinged. A headline slid across screens. "Billionaire's equation flawed. Experts confirm." The clip from the restaurant had reached the math department at Stanford. Within hours, professors verified her claim. Hartwell's face blanched. He turned toward the exit, his entourage scrambling to follow. Carter leaned toward Kesha. "You've done it," she said. "No," Kesha answered, feeling both light and strangely hollow. "I've only proven what he already knew." They left the hall together through a side door. Outside, the late afternoon light burned low, gold between the buildings. The campus buzzed with students, voices overlapping like birds. "What happens now?" Kesha asked. "Now," Carter said. "You let the world decide what kind of justice it wants. It always takes longer than the lie." They reached Broadway. Carter stopped, turned to her. "Come by my office tomorrow. There's a fellowship in my department. It's yours if you want it. I don't know if I'm ready. Readiness is overrated. Truth isn't." Carter hailed another cab and was gone. Kesha stood there, watching the traffic move like equations resolving into patterns. Her phone buzzed messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, from MIT classmates, from reporters. She ignored them all. She walked back downtown instead, choosing the long route along Riverside Drive, where the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and diesel. The city stretched around her, indifferent and magnificent. At a crosswalk, an older man in a delivery uniform nodded at her and said, "Saw you on TV, miss. That was something." She smiled, small and real. "Thank you." He tipped his cap, the gesture carrying the quiet respect of one worker to another. When she reached Le Bernardin, the night shift had already started. Through the window, she saw the same tables, the same flickering candles, as if nothing had happened. But near the entrance, framed on the wall, was the napkin pressed, dried, mounted under glass. The manager must have done it that morning. Beneath it, a handwritten note in simple black script read, "Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform." She stood there for a long moment, watching her reflection merge with the glass until the two became indistinguishable. For the first time in years, she felt something close to belonging not to a place, but to the truth itself. The city lights blinked against the evening sky, each one an unanswered question. Somewhere far above, a billboard displayed Hartwell's company logo, its edges already half-shadowed by dusk. She turned away and walked south toward the subway, the rhythm of her footsteps steady as a metronome. The night swallowed her, but she was no longer invisible. The storm came 2 nights later, a hard New York rain that blurred the skyline and turned the streets into mirrors of neon. Kesha stood at the bus stop outside her mother's apartment in Queens, hood pulled low, a cardboard box of groceries tucked under one arm. She had promised herself not to check her phone, but curiosity gnawed like hunger. When she finally glanced at the screen, the headline waiting there was colder than the rain. Hartwell files suit against former MIT student for defamation and IP theft. Her stomach dropped. Beneath the headline was a photo of her, taken from a news clip, the whiteboard behind her, her expression mid-sentence, a woman daring the world to listen. The caption called her, "the viral waitress." Her mother's voice came faintly from the upstairs window. "Baby? That you?" "Yeah. Mom, it's me," Kesha called, pushing through the rusted gate. The apartment smelled like chamomile tea and laundry soap, the constants of their survival. Laura Williams sat on the couch with a blanket over her knees, oxygen tube draped neatly, her eyes proud and worried all at once. "They talk about you on TV," she said. "Said you showed that man up. But I don't like his look, the way he talks. Mean eyes." Kesha forced a smile and unpacked the box. "Don't worry, Mom, he can't hurt me. Rich men always find a way," her mother said softly. The line hit deeper than Kesha expected. That night she couldn't sleep. Thunder rolled outside, heavy and deliberate. Every vibration felt like a warning. She opened her laptop, scanning the lawsuit details, technical jargon, public relations poison. He'd accused her of slander, of falsifying data, even of conspiring with rival firms. She laughed once, short and bitter. It was a legal masterpiece of intimidation. Then came the message alert. "Unknown number. You should have stayed quiet." She stared at it until the letters blurred. The next day, Carter called. "Don't panic," she said. "This is strategy. He's trying to scare you into silence. It's working. Then let's make it backfire. I've contacted a journalist at The Atlantic. She wants your side on record. Won't that make it worse? Truth always makes it worse before it makes it right." Carter's tone softened. "Kesha, you're not fighting alone." Later that evening they met at a small coffee shop near Columbia. The journalist, Maria Alvarez, mid-40s, skeptical eyes softened by empathy, recorded on a tiny device between the cups. "Why did you speak up that night?" she asked. "Because he was wrong," Kesha said simply. "And because no one else said it." Maria nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I'm just trying to remember that what's true doesn't stop being true because someone rich hates it." When the interview ran online, the effect was immediate. Public sympathy swung like a pendulum. Comment sections filled with words like courage and integrity. And under them, quieter voices that whispered she was ungrateful. that she should have known her place. Carter warned her not to read them, but she couldn't help it. The cruelty was almost mathematical, equal and opposite reactions to every bit of praise. Meanwhile, Hartwell moved in silence. His PR team scrubbed the internet, planted articles, questioning her education, hinting at plagiarism, painting her as an opportunist. News anchors debated whether a waitress mathematician was believable or just viral theater. One anchor chuckled. Next we'll have janitors lecturing at Harvard. Kesha turned off the TV, heart pounding. She began receiving emails from strangers, some kind, some venomous. One said, "We see you, sister." Another, "You embarrassed a great man. Hope you're proud when you're jobless." The fear crept in slowly, like cold under a door. It wasn't until she arrived at work one afternoon to find a plain envelope taped to her locker that she understood how deep the attack went. Inside was a photo of her brother, taken from outside his school, with the words "Be careful" printed beneath. She sank onto the bench, trembling. Jeppy found her there, white-faced. "What's that?" he asked. Then saw. "Jesus. Don't call the police yet," she said, voice tight. "They'll just say it's coincidence." But later that night she did file a report, standing under the harsh fluorescent light of the precinct, explaining to a weary officer who only half listened. "Probably some internet troll," he said. "Lay low. Lay low like you can hide from a story already alive in the bloodstream of the city." Days blurred into each other. Carter organized legal counsel, pro bono. Supporters began raising funds for Kesha's defense. She refused the money but couldn't stop them. At night she still worked at the restaurant. Jeppy insisted she stay on, said the regulars asked for her section. Some came only to see her, the waitress who challenged a billionaire. They smiled shyly, left notes on receipts. "Keep standing tall." Still, the tension followed her like static. One night, near closing, she caught sight of a man sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Expensive suit. No drink. Eyes hidden behind glasses despite the dim light. He watched her every move. When she approached, he stood and left, leaving behind a single business card. No name, only an embossed infinity symbol. She brought it to Carter the next morning. Carter frowned. "He's escalating. This is intimidation. What should I do?" "Document everything. Fear is his last equation." That night, thunder returned. Kesha dreamed of whiteboards stretching into darkness, of equations unraveling into snakes. When she woke, the apartment was silent except for her mother's steady breathing. She walked to the window. Across the street, parked under the flickering lamppost, sat a black car she didn't recognize. Its engine idled, exhaust curling into the damp air. She stood there for nearly a minute, then turned away. In the morning, it was gone. The following afternoon she was summoned to the restaurant's office. Jeppy's eyes were red. "They're pulling the plug," he said. "Head office doesn't want the attention." "I'm sorry." She nodded. Too tired for anger. As she walked out, the framed napkin caught her eye. It gleamed under the light, defiant, untouched. Outside, reporters waited. Questions flew like arrows. "Miss Williams, did you fabricate your proof? Are you in hiding? Is it true Hartwell's team offered you a settlement?" She pushed through without answering, rain soaking her coat. Somewhere behind her, someone shouted, "You're a hero." Another, "You're a fraud." Both voices sounded the same now. That night, she sat alone in a diner near the river, staring at the city's reflection. Her phone buzzed again, this time, a message from an unknown email address. "You've got 1 week to retract or y'all lose everything." She exhaled slowly. The waitress refilled her coffee, murmured, "Hang in there, honey." The kindness almost broke her. She thought of Carter, of her mother's words, of the little boy in the photo who didn't know his sister was now a headline. She opened her notebook, the same one from it, and began to write not equations this time, but sentences. Each one a defense, a memory, a truth. Outside, the rain thickened. Across the river, the lights of Hartwell Tower flickered in the fog like a heartbeat she refused to match. In that moment, she understood the next step wasn't to hide or react, it was to prove, again, but on her own terms. The storm outside swelled, echoing the one building quietly inside her. The morning of the hearing dawned gray. The kind of cold light that makes the city look metallic and temporary. Kesha stood on the courthouse steps with a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hands, her reflection faint in the wet marble columns. The air buzzed with reporters, their microphones sharp as spears, waiting for a sound bite. Carter arrived beside her, coat collar turned up, calm as ever. "Remember," she said quietly, "they'll try to rattle you. Speak to the judge, not to him." Kesha nodded. Her heart felt like a drum wrapped too tightly. Inside, the courtroom smelled of paper and polish. Hartwell sat at the front with his lawyers, 3 men in dark suits, identical haircuts, identical smiles. He didn't look at her at first. He spoke softly to his counsel, every movement rehearsed. When the judge entered, the shuffle of standing bodies filled the air. The proceedings began with the precision of a machine. Hartwell's lawyer outlined the charges: defamation, theft of intellectual property, willful harm to reputation. Each word felt absurd and heavy, a weapon shaped like grammar. Kesha's attorney, a lean man named David Phelps, rose with quiet dignity. "My client revealed a mathematical error in a public setting. Truth, Your Honor, cannot be defamatory." The judge, an older woman with eyes that had seen too many egos crumble, adjusted her glasses. "Proceed." The first hour was procedural, slow as molasses. Hartwell's team displayed slides, articles, snippets of online chatter meant to prove she'd acted maliciously. They called her a social media opportunist. She sat still, hands clasped, watching them rewrite her as a caricature. When it was her turn to testify, the room hushed. She walked to the stand, feeling the weight of every camera lens behind her. "Miss Williams." The opposing lawyer began, voice smooth as silk. "You admit you publicly contradicted Mr. Hartwell, correct?" "I corrected a calculation," she said evenly. "In front of his investors?" "He challenged me publicly," I answered. "And you claim this wasn't an attempt to humiliate him?" "I didn't humiliate him," she said. "Truth did." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lawyer's smile faltered. He leaned closer. "You studied at MIT?" "Until I couldn't afford to continue." "And you left without a degree?" "Yes." "So, no formal qualification in advanced mathematics?" "No framed paper, if that's what you mean." "Yet you expect this court to believe you outsmarted one of the most brilliant innovators in the country?" Kesha met his gaze. "I don't expect belief. I expect understanding. Proof doesn't need permission." The judge's brow twitched in what might have been amusement. "Let her finish," she said. Kesha took a breath, steadying herself. "Your Honor, I didn't come here to fight him. I came because he turned an equation into a weapon. He made being right feel like a crime." Hartwell finally looked at her then. His expression was unreadable, half fury, half fascination. "You think you're some kind of martyr?" he said, forgetting the microphone that amplified every word. "You think you can dismantle me with chalk?" "No," she said softly. "With truth." Carter smiled from the gallery, small and proud. The judge rapped her gavel once. "Order." The rest unfolded in a blur of witnesses and exhibits. Carter took the stand, confirming the accuracy of Kesha's correction. Several university professors submitted statements verifying it. Then came a twist no one expected. One of Hartwell's own engineers, a young man named Ethan Tran, requested to testify. Nervously clutching a folder, he admitted that internal reports had long documented the same flaw reports Hartwell had ignored to protect his company's valuation. Gasps filled the room. The judge leaned forward. "Is this true, Mr. Hartwell?" Hartwell's silence was an answer. Kesha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The weight that had pressed on her chest for weeks lifted, replaced by something strange and bright relief mixed with sorrow. She hadn't wanted his ruin, only acknowledgement. But truth, once freed, moves in straight lines, not circles. After a recess, the judge returned with her verdict. This court finds no basis for defamation or intellectual theft. The defendant acted within her rights to correct a public statement of fact. Furthermore, evidence indicates the plaintiff knowingly concealed critical errors within his enterprise. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once, final as thunder. Reporters burst into whispers. Kesha sat frozen, tears rising uninvited. Carter reached for her hand. "It's done," she said. Hartwell stood motionless as his lawyers gathered their papers, his empire beginning to crack beneath the weight of revelation. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed wet in the afternoon light. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. "Miss Williams, how does it feel? Do you plan to countersue? What will you do next?" She paused at the top of the steps. Rain beginning to fall again, washing the marble clean. "I'm going home," she said. That evening, she returned to Queens. Her mother met her at the door, eyes bright with pride. "They said you won," she whispered. "No, Mom," Kesha said, hugging her tightly. "Truth won." Later, she sat by the window, city lights flickering across her notebook. The fear that had once wrapped around her was gone, replaced by a calm exhaustion. The phone buzzed again, unknown number. This time the message was short. "You were right." She knew it was him. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened the window and let the cool air in. Somewhere across the river, Hartwell Tower's lights blinked out one by one, the skyline swallowing them. The next morning, newspapers carried her photo, no longer the viral waitress, but the woman who proved the truth. Carter called to say the university wanted her as a research fellow. She laughed, disbelieving. "Me? A professor?" "Not yet," Carter said. "But close enough." Kesha walked to the restaurant that afternoon to collect her things. The napkin was still there, framed and gleaming. She stood before it, remembering the hush of that night, the way the world had balanced on a drop of ink. A new plaque hung beneath it now. "The Williams equation: honesty has no uniform." She smiled. When she stepped outside, the sky was clearing, the rain easing into sunlight. The city smelled clean, reborn. As she walked toward the subway, an elderly man in a suit stopped her. "Miss Williams?" he asked. "I was there that night. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that courage and arrogance are not the same." She thanked him, moved, and kept walking. The wind off the Hudson caught her hair, lifting it like a flag. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely her own. Somewhere behind her, sirens wailed and taxis honked. The eternal song of the city. But she didn't hurry. The world, once deaf, was listening now. Autumn came early that year, softening the city's edges with the smell of wet leaves and roasted chestnuts from the street carts. 2 months had passed since the verdict, and the noise around her name had begun to fade, replaced by something quieter and steadier. People still recognized her sometimes on the subway, in the grocery store, but the frenzy had cooled into respect. "You're the math lady," a boy said once, shyly offering her a folded napkin with scribbles on it. She laughed and signed it like an autograph, realizing he'd drawn infinity symbols looping into hearts. Le Bernardin had called her back, not to serve, but to speak. The restaurant was hosting a charity dinner for women in science, sponsored by a new foundation bearing a name she barely believed when she saw it printed on the invitation. The Williams Carter Fellowship. She'd resisted at first, not wanting to be turned into an emblem, but Carter had convinced her. "Symbols matter," she'd said. "Especially when they come from truth." The night of the dinner, the air was crisp, the city glittering like it had polished itself for the occasion. Inside, the familiar clink of glassware and hum of polite conversation carried a different rhythm, now one of admiration instead of scrutiny. The framed napkin still hung by the entrance, its ink faded slightly, its story already legend. She paused before it, tracing the outline of her own handwriting through the glass, feeling the strange ache of nostalgia for a night that had nearly broken her. Carter found her there, elegant as always, a glass of white wine in hand. "You should come up and say a few words," she said. "I think I've said enough for one lifetime," Kesha replied. "Not to them." Carter nodded toward the dining room where rows of young women in lab coats and cocktail dresses mingled, students, teachers, dreamers. "They need to hear what courage sounds like after the storm." A waiter approached, handing Kesha a small envelope embossed with silver ink. "This came for you," he said. Inside was a note, handwritten in clean, measured script. "Congratulations. The foundation transfer is complete. Use it well. Signed simply R. H." For a long moment she stared at the initials, unsure what to feel. Anger had cooled long ago into something closer to understanding. Hartwell had disappeared from public life, resigning from his company weeks after the verdict. The media called it a downfall. She called it a reckoning. She folded the note and slipped it into her clutch, whispering to herself, "Justice isn't revenge, it's balance." When Carter introduced her, applause rippled through the room. She stood at the small stage near the bar, the same spot where months earlier she'd been challenged like an intruder. Now, the light was warm, kind. "I'm not here to talk about math," she began, voice steady. "I'm here to talk about visibility. For years, I thought silence was safety, that if I worked hard, stayed quiet, stayed small, life would be fair. But fairness doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth, even when truth costs you everything." She paused, scanning the faces in the audience, many older, many nodding. "I once told a man mathematics doesn't care about my uniform. I think I finally understand what I meant. Equations are honest. They don't flatter or deceive. They don't care if your hands smell like soap or caviar. They just reveal what's real. And people, if we're lucky, can do the same." The room fell still, the kind of stillness that happens when words land in the right hearts. Someone began to clap, then the rest joined, the sound rising like a wave. Kesha smiled, humbled, almost shy. Afterward, people came up to shake her hand, to thank her, to share small confessions about dreams they'd buried and were now thinking of unearthing. She listened to each one, feeling a quiet joy that didn't need applause. Later that night, when the event ended and the restaurant emptied, she lingered near the window, watching the city lights shimmer through the drizzle. Carter joined her, coat draped over one arm. "You know," she said, "Hartwell's lawyers approached me. He's establishing a scholarship under your name." Kesha blinked. "Why would he do that?" "Because guilt, when it finally learns humility, can become grace." Kesha considered this, then shook her head gently. "He doesn't owe me anything. The truth already paid." Carter smiled. "Maybe he knows that too." They parted outside, promising to meet again for lunch. The night air carried the faint scent of rain and hot pretzels from a vendor closing his cart. Kesha walked toward the subway, the city humming softly beneath her feet. She passed a bookstore window where a television played a news recap about the equation that changed a billionaire. She barely glanced at it. At home, her mother was asleep, the oxygen machine humming. On the kitchen table sat a letter from Princeton confirming her teaching schedule for the spring semester. She read it twice, smiling. Life had returned to ordinary rhythm: bills, laundry, morning coffee, but even the ordinary felt miraculous now. Before bed, she opened her old notebook, the one that had followed her through every chapter of chaos, and on the final blank page she wrote, "Justice doesn't shine. It steadies. It waits until the noise fades, then stands quietly in what remains." She closed the notebook, exhaled, and turned off the light. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the window like a promise. She rode the subway to campus, blending into the crowd of commuters. No cameras, no questions, just faces lost in thought, strangers holding their own battles. A man across from her glanced up from his newspaper and smiled faintly. "You're her, aren't you? The math lady." She laughed. "That's what they tell me. My daughter watched you on TV," he said. "She wants to study physics now." The train jolted, lights flickering, and for a heartbeat she saw her reflection layered over his, a reminder that the ripples of one voice can reach further than sight. When she arrived at Princeton, the autumn trees flamed gold along the walkways. In her new office, still smelling of paint and paper, she unpacked a framed photograph of her mother and brother, setting it beside the window. Then she placed the napkin creased, yellowed, edges fragile into a small glass frame on the desk. Not as a trophy, but as testimony. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the spires, she walked to the lecture hall, where her first class waited. The students fell silent when she entered, curiosity shining in their eyes. She smiled, picking up a piece of chalk, the same way she had months ago in that restaurant. "All right," she said. "Let's start with a question. What happens when infinity folds back on itself?" A few hands lifted uncertainly. She laughed softly. "Don't worry. The right answer isn't in the numbers. It's in how you see them." As she drew the first symbol on the board, the rhythm returned, the calm precision of motion, the quiet joy of purpose. Outside, dusk settled over the campus. And somewhere far away, the city lights flickered like equations still unfolding. She didn't need applause or headlines anymore. The world had moved on, and so had she, carrying with her the one truth she'd earned through fire. That courage is a form of clarity, and clarity, once seen, can never be unseen.